First of all, thank you very much for joining this webinar. We really appreciate you joining, Talal and Edgar. Let me do a round of introduction first. I'm Reem Ashraf, VP of Growth at KnowledgeNet. And I have with me Engineer Talal Al-Bakr. He's the CEO of SCCC in Saudi Arabia, chairman and co-founder of Data Insights, and co-founder of Embark Saudi, among other titles, mashallah. I also have with me Edgar Felberg. He's a commercial agent at Vacon UG. Thank you very much for joining me again. Today's topic is actually very, very interesting for this, especially for this part of the world. MENA is really looking forward to adopt open banking and further open finance and banking as a service. And maybe more specifically, Saudi Arabia, with 67% of the population who have used a fintech at least once in the past year. And we're talking about 93% who conduct banking activities electronically. Open banking is quite an exciting topic, and further infrastructure towards an open finance ecosystem in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, GCC, and the rest of the MENA region. We're seeing a lot of adoption of fintechs as well in this region. There is a lot going on in Egypt as well, in Saudi Arabia, in UAE. So let me start with Engineer Talal. Could you give us a status of what is the open banking looking like in KSA?
Well, in KSA, we have the open banking framework that has been approved by the central bank, SAMA. The adoption has been extremely quick. There is, again, the ecosystem is still evolving. We have a lot of fintechs that rely on open banking that are starting to come out. But what's very critical to understand, today, what SAMA has regulated and what they have approved so far is open banking with regards to account information services. So the payment initiation element of open banking still hasn't really been activated. So it's really in its basic form of specific aspects around account information, credit scoring, and things like that. I believe by the end of this year, once payment initiation kicks off, things are going to start to pick up even at a bigger scale. And we're going to see adoption beyond fintech. And I think that's where the industry and where the central bank is really interested in seeing open banking go, not just on the fintech community, but also on other potential startups and different use cases in the market.
I'm with you. I think it's a very interesting time, especially in the KSA, with all the sped up regulations that SAMA continues to release. And I think it's one of the forefronts in the region to adopt. So we're obviously seeing Bahrain and KSA at the forefront of the open banking scene in the MENA region. Edgar, you're in Germany. Tell us how is the adoption of open banking in Germany? I understand that. Just give us a little bit of a brief about the infrastructure acceleration, but maybe more so the adoption of open banking. How's it going on there?
So if you're looking around Europe, because German regulation is unified with all the rest of the Europe, so it's based on Berlin Group standard, and it's regulated in PSD2. And if we can look, for example, in examples around the globe in different regions, also in MENA region, these countries try to adopt the same standard that is as Berlin Group, as PSD2. So that, for example, if the fintechs wants to move to a different country, then they have the same standard, and it's a lot easier. So I think it's very important, and that the new countries that come in with the adoption to open banking, that standard is unified, and it is a lot easier for fintechs and new startups to adopt that and build their solution for that.
And do you see the banks and the other stakeholders in the BFS ecosystem in Germany and the wider European region helping with the adoption of the end consumer in Europe?
Yes, but at the same time, it involves a lot of work from this fintechs and also the banks that they does the adoption of the open banking, because there's minimal standards that is regulated that the banks needs to do. But if they want to use all the scope of the possibilities of the open banking, they need to make a step forward and make the more adoptions and more integrations that they can expose more data for the fintech. So that's also very important. But yeah, the main burden and main thing that is on the hands of the fintechs and the banks itself and the financial institutions.
Yeah, I think I would ditto that as well. Banks and the incumbent players in the market, there's a big role on them, because I think there's a point where they need to feel safe that their revenue channels are going to continue, but in a different format, and they have to create that format early on. Engineer Talal, back to you. We see the UK version of open banking starting in 2019, and up to date, the adoption was only 8 million users of the open banking. We're talking about now 2023, and I think this number was until end of 2022. How can we secure in the kingdom and maybe the wider GCC group with very high internet penetration, very young and tech-hungry consumer base, that we have a higher and maybe a better adoption rate of open banking at the end consumer level?
No, it's interesting that you brought up the UK. The UK, as everybody knows, was the leading country with regards to open banking. But the adoption rate slowly trickled down and started to really slow down and almost come to a basic halt. Again, what open banking really? What's the benefit of open banking? And what's the vision behind it? It's to empower optimized way of doing things. It's not to compete with traditional banks. It's not to really hurt their time frame. It's to optimize existing offerings and make them more cost effective, provide solutions that weren't in the market previously, and sort of enrich the ecosystem. And while the UK adapted early on a lot of things with regards to open banking, they stagnated and they were burdened by the regulatory aspects, and they started to overburden these different elements of the industry. And the barrier to entry became harder and harder, even on fintechs. While the original approach of what open banking was made to do was to simplify the approach and the penetration of these fintechs into the market, not to compete with banks specifically, but to provide additional offerings and new solutions to customers. And this is, I think, where it entails. So if we hope within the region, and specifically in Saudi, to adapt more people onto the fintech and the open banking element, it's about the richness and the diversity of offering. What SAMA right now, with regards to the central bank in Saudi Arabia, is doing is they're embracing a lot of these fintechs. They've built a new division where they're really working in partnership with the fintechs against specific guidelines and regulatory aspects within SAMA. So there is this division within SAMA that's helping you against SAMA, if you will, if we are to simplify that. And it's not about being against it. It's about streamlining the regulatory aspect. It's about bringing viewpoints together. And this is where I think it entails. How does the regulator work hand in hand with the ecosystem be it the fintechs, be it the banks, because at the end of the day, open banking doesn't work without banks. And if banks feel threatened and don't feel the benefit of open banking, then it's not a symbiotic relationship, and it becomes disruptive.
Yes.
Yeah, I got that. So this is where something that I think the regulator really has to play a keen role in enabling new and innovative fintechs to come into the market. And with the SAMA sandbox, we're seeing that being really executed in a very good way.
Yeah, we actually see a lot of movement happening over there with regards to fintech certification. I think 1 week ago, SAMA certified the first BNPL fintech in the kingdom. So yes, I think SAMA is really taking strides in terms of tweaking the regulations, or maybe not tweaking, maybe adopting the new frameworks of what the consumers need. I think they have, yes, a very near ear in terms of what the population wants, and how to validate the adoption of the fintechs towards that new ecosystem. So yeah, I think they're doing great. And we're also seeing CBDCs as well. So speaking of which, it's also to Engineer Talal, moving maybe from open banking to the next wave of that ecosystem, which I think this is when it starts to get more interesting, which is banking as a service, banking as a platform that enhances and paves the path towards an open finance space. Where do you see the region going in that space, and what kind of maybe use case? Because I think there's a lot of localization going in that space. You see the Brazilian example, you see the German example, you see the UK example. How do you see the MENA is going to play out in that space?
Now, the problem with the MENA specifically, it's extremely siloed, and every country has its own regulation. Every country has its own approach to the problem, if you will. But again, we're seeing a lot of parallel alignment, if you will, where somebody can open something within the multiple countries and sort of do cross integration and cross control. It's still not highly regulated because you start to break into and go into data privacy aspect, data localization aspects. So it becomes extremely complicated on that regard. But again, we're seeing a lot of similarities. We're seeing a lot of alignment in that regard. And we're seeing a lot of people really working at finding unique operational solutions to that. That being said, I think we're still in the infancy of it. A lot of countries are, and regulators within countries are still evaluating the different use cases and how they might be able to utilize them. And what we're going to see, I think, eventually is once we reach the level of maturity, we're going to be able to open things up cross border on a GCC level, like we saw between Saudi and UAE with regards to the Ripple integration for the currency exchange and things like that. So there are these different elements that are working, and I think as we progress, we're going to see more and more of those elements play out.
Yeah, we really hope that we find that sweet spot in the MENA region. Moving on to Edgar. If we maybe zoom in further to the European example of the open finance, we see multiple examples there, and I think a lot of them are successful examples as well. You see the diversification example, you see the augmentation, you see the productization use case of open finance. So you see the ones who've done super apps, you see the banks who have almost turned into a tech company. You have the example of Solaris. How do you see these different use cases helping with the adoption of the end consumer and how are they eventually playing out in the end from a consumer standpoint as opposed from an infrastructure standpoint?
I think the most important is to understand what is the demand, what the end customer wants. And if we are looking at the success of the big companies that have developed these unique platforms and the solutions, they were not working from the infrastructure side. They didn't start thinking what they can do, what is the infrastructure providing them, but they started to working from the looking at the demand, what the customer needs, where is the problem, where is the issue, what we can fix, and what can be done easier. And when working with banks in Europe and working with banks in MENA region, like in Dubai or Saudi Arabia, there's usually at least a year and 2 years ago from the bank side, when providing the infrastructure for these solutions, there was not a lot of understanding from the bank side. I hope now I hope and I see that it's getting better and better, but there were a lot of issues regarding the data protection and exposing the data that should not be exposed in the specific cases. But yeah, if you're talking about these big success stories, so to say, that's I think the most important is the aspect of the customer, because the banks and the financial institutions also concentrates on the clients that they have, so they need to cater for their needs, and the infrastructure and the solutions will follow that. But if we are looking, for example, if some kind of solutions from other countries like Europe or Africa or other countries can be adopted, copy paste, so to say, to MENA region, I could not say it like that. It cannot be done the same way, because the customer is the culture, the language, the trust issues. These are a bit different. But it's very important to look at the best examples that there is in the market. But also, it's very important what is also from the technological side, what the banks can provide. Because if we look at the regulation that is in MENA region, Saudi Arabia or at other countries, as was said already in this today here, these are not very till the end complete, and there's a lot of gaps. So at this point, it's very important to look for the security of the data, and not only the personal data, but bank data that could be easily exposed, that have happened in the past, because the banks rushed in introducing some open bank solutions before the regulation, and without that there was some issues that occurred that were not very good, so to say.
This is actually taking me to a very interesting point. So in the MENA region at large, you see some regions that are regulatory-led regions, like, for example, Saudi Arabia and Bahrain. And you have other regions that are market-led regions. So as you've kindly said, you see the banks adopting certain frameworks, and then the regs would see if there's an adoption rate in that space in the BFS sector, and then they start regularizing this behavior or this frame of work. Given that there are a lot of different stakeholder groups within a certain country in the BFS sector, and even cross-border. Maybe let me start with Engineer Talal with that question. How do you see if you can give us a little bit of light in terms of the maturity of the different stakeholder groups in the open banking adoption within Saudi Arabia and maybe at large in the MENA region? And would that affect the adoption rates, and would that affect our path towards an open finance industry?
That's an interesting question. Again, what we're seeing today in the stakeholder ecosystem, we're at the beginning, and so there is a lot of pushback. There's a lot of ambiguity. A lot of people don't really understand a lot of the different elements of what open banking is supposed to be doing. Surprisingly, some banks also have issues with understanding where open banking plays and how they contribute to it, and what the element of open banking will be with regards to them. So it is a process. I think the regulation in Saudi specifically was finalized last year, and it was very clearly stated and how they wanted to execute on it, and it's becoming clear now. It's being pushed as a mandate to banks, which is one of the most important stakeholders, because they, at the end of the day, are the owner of the account information and payment initiation. So they're very critical. The banks right now are adopting it. It is a process that is taking longer than anticipated, but it is, again, it's a disruptive process. Banks traditionally are old school. They're very set in their ways. So open banking comes and really stirs things up. So a lot of these legacy environments, legacy setups are being challenged. And how do you really integrate them and make the APIs in order to connect externally becomes extremely challenging, not only on a strategic level, but also on a technical level. And so there are elements of pushback with regards to that from a technical team, from technical limitations, technical problems. A lot of banks have legacy systems that have been running for 20 years plus. Not all banks are new. Newer banks are easier to adapt. But again, every system has, every bank has its own obstacles. And as we progress and start to look at things in different ways. So today, when you look at the fintechs are focused on building this new solution. And then you bring in regulations to that they need to abide by in order to integrate with bank. And the integration aspects are extremely heavy. So a lot of fintechs are coming in without really understanding what they need to do to integrate with banks. So they're good at building their model and how it needs to operate. And then they're saying, okay, then we put a module and we integrate with a bank account. So when you're introducing open banking and you're allowing that fintech to fully integrate and become an extended part of the banking ecosystem, what a lot of them don't understand is they are now liable for that whole chain of ecosystem and liability with regards to data control and fund control and fund execution. And that's something that a lot of fintechs really are working on and trying to develop that. Initially, they were saying, okay, I'll build a closed ecosystem, and then I'll just do a payment gateway, which is the traditional way of doing things. And that doesn't expose the fintech to the limitations or the aspects of the bank. But when you're starting to talk to APIs, then the whole value chain from the fintech itself, the aggregator, and then eventually the bank starts to become one ecosystem. And then the security controls around one has to really propagate to the rest. And that, for a lot of fintechs, is a different level of control that they haven't really thought about, that they need to work on. And this is where I believe aggregators will play a bigger role into really streamlining the adoption of APIs with these fintechs and helping them to really streamline their business and really execute in a faster way.
I think aggregators are going to, as you've kindly said, iron out a lot of the commonalities in the open banking infrastructure space to hopefully accelerate the adoption and the bringing the different stakeholder groups up to the same speed, hopefully. My next question is to Edgar. Europe has mainly passed that infrastructure stage of open banking, which MENA region is at the moment. And I think you've entered into that next stage or next wave into that open finance space with creating a lot of use cases around the bank service and around the open finance ecosystem. So you see the PFMs, you see the super apps, you see the payment, the different payment models in Europe. Yeah, so fintechs are taking that front scene with the end consumer. Can you give us a little bit of light around the monetization and commercialization of that space? Because I think this is one of the areas where there's a little bit of skepticism around it. Banks don't want to take that step. They want to hold on to their conventional commercial models. They don't want to let go of that. So give us, shed some light into the Europe example as to that there is light at the end of the funnel that we are in right now.
I will start with two ways how the banks integrate with open banking. There's not two ways, but two reasons why they do that. One is because the regulator is asking to do that. And there I have been involved in cases where the banks wants to adopt open banking and open finance because they want to introduce certain of kind of service that will be provided by third party. And the banks that goes only to deal with the that is required by regulator, they are not looking for the monetization of that. They just want to do the bare minimum that they have it, and that's it. But those banks that goes and do that proactively and already looks for the solutions that might be interesting for them, they all at the same time looks at the cash flow that can bring them that. So if you're looking at the examples that are in the Europe, there are solutions that banks try to adopt. For example, if a customer has multiple bank accounts in multiple banks, they can use the one provider, the third-party app, that they can log into their internet banking. They don't need to download multiple applications or something on their phones. They can use one for 5, 6, 10 banks. If one country unifies that, then that's a lot easier for the customer. Also, the banks can monetize by using this to allow customers to log in with bank credentials in other third-party sites. For example, to identify you as you are you, and you can get some kind of I don't know, service where you need to identify yourself, or even with governmental sites. If you need some kind of services from government, so you can use the bank logins and bank details, and all that can be monetized for example, for the one API call, or for the data that is required, what is the amount of it. Also, if it will be more related to Europe and other countries, that, for example, if the customer needs to open a new bank account in another bank, they can use the KYC and the information given to the bank that is verified already that. So there's a lot of mix and match that can be done. So the one bank can use other banks' data, and then the third party is not only who develops the applications, but the not related to financial sector companies can use that open banking and open finance provided solutions to monetize that also for their benefit. If, for example, customer doesn't need to fill out long questionnaires, KYCs, upload their passports, and that sort of things, just log in with their um, internet bank. That speeds up the process. The customer is more satisfied. The deal is signed a lot quicker, and it helps overall the environment. And also at the same time, if the customer uses so often the banks provided solutions, it gives a possibility for the banks to market more precisely for the customer needs, because they see the requests that the customer is made, because they are providing the information. So they see where they are going, what kind of third-party applications they're using, so they can modify their special offers or for their customers also by using that.
I was attending FSC last week in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and one of the CEOs of the fintechs, he was mentioning that I think they did it in Qatar during the World Cup, that there was payment with only facial recognition. So I'm really looking forward to these new ways of banking without, as you've kindly said, Edgar, like a fully digitized KYC service. It's more sustainable, greener, faster, banking agnostic, fintechs in the front line, and maybe a much more seamless and synergized banking service for the end consumers. I'm really looking forward to that sustainable future. I think given that I've touched based on the FSC, I have to ask Engineer Talal one very important figure that stuck in my head and I took it away with me from the FSC, is the notion of having the KSA economy grow until 2030 to have an increase in GDP by 200 billion and a promised year-on-year compound annual gross revenue of more than 20%. How do you see open banking within the kingdom helping towards that figure? And a final note from you.
Yeah, sure. Again, what we're seeing right now is, you mentioned it and you touched on it. We have a very young population, and they're very digitally entrenched, and they're very digitally capable, and they're early adopters, if you will, for a lot of these different technologies. And on average, the utilization rate within Saudi exceeds large global players and G20 players. So what we've been really banking on, and what we believe open banking will really open up, is one very important aspect. Once you give a good solution to this young population that really opens up their capabilities and their potential to different elements in offering, then you can really take things to the next level. And if you see how, for instance, STC Pay got adapted, it was extremely adapted in a very quick way. People were very excited, not for the e-wallet concept per se, but for new and innovative services. And that's where really we're seeing a lot of potential and a lot of change. And the adoption of these different technologies are going to be enriched further and further. During the pandemic, we saw a huge shift to digital payments. And we saw a huge shift in Saudi into the situation where cashless transactions were the norm. If you go into a place today and you try to pay with cash, people will most likely not have change. And we're seeing that adapted further and further and further. And that goes into really empowering the digital economy and how we want to really digitize the whole experience from A to Z. And the young population that we have, the youth of the population that we have, are early adapters, and they're embracing a lot of these technologies and helping us really come up with new ideas. So once you have a young generation that's coming in, adapting different unique ways of doing things, allowing you to do an experiment with different aspects and allowing new companies to launch, then that's going to really streamline the innovation process. And once open banking starts to evolve, we're going to see fintech start to evolve. What's important and what Vision 2030 really entails and wants to really tap into is making it an innovative economy so that once these fintechs start to embrace the models within Saudi, they understand how to conduct things properly and be able to execute in a highly regulated market. That means they have all the elements to extend beyond Saudi into GCC, into MENA, and eventually globally. And that's where the GDP growth is going to come. It's going to come in opening the economy, opening the different industry, the banking industry, the different potential of let's say, problem solving and solution building that the youth will come up with, and really allowing that to execute externally and bringing in GDP from outside of Saudi.
We're really hoping that these fantastic numbers would be met and beyond. I've also recently saw an interview with the Minister of Foreign Affairs when he mentioned that yes, a stabilized GDP of a country means that the neighboring countries and the neighboring region, they have to be also stabilized and they have to be prospering as well. So yeah, we're really looking forward to a prospering MENA, inshallah, come 2030 and even before that. Edgar, on to you. One last piece of advice in terms of open banking and further adoptions to the open finance for the MENA region.
The most important, I think, is looking further than just the regulation. And also important is that if one country in the region has already adopted something and working on one standard, it's a good idea to go with the same path, because it will be a lot easier to cross-border companies to work in multiple countries, basically. And also for the banks, it's very important to try to partner up maybe with some kind of fintechs and finance the work that they're doing to encourage the fintechs to develop something that is very necessary and needed for the banks themselves. I have seen in Asia, in Middle East, also in Europe, where banks partner up with fintechs, and in the request of the banks, they develop something for them. So that's the possibilities that the open banking and open finance gives to the banks, the freedom and also not to forget about the end customer. So these are the main suggestions from my side. I have seen a lot of mistakes done, but yeah, the most important is to go and do and learn from the mistakes.
Yeah, that's actually a very high closing note. Thank you very much, Edgar. I really had a pleasure chatting with you, Engineer Talal and Edgar, about open banking and the opportunities in the MENA region. Thank you very much for attending to this webinar. I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And
Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to many more chats and discussions to maybe celebrate the growth of the potential that we talked about today.
Inshallah, I hope so.
Inshallah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and have a great night.
You as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.